The name settled over her like a blessing, like coming home after a long journey through foreign lands. She was no longer the abandoned half-breed, no longer the woman who didn't quite belong in either world. She was Ayana Atsila, daughter of the Salagi, keeper of the forever fire. The celebration continued until dawn, with dancing and storytelling, and the sharing of sacred medicines that opened her mind to visions of her ancestors. She saw her mother as a young woman, beautiful and proud and full of hope. She saw the long journey of her people, the suffering they had endured, the strength they had found in each other. And she saw something else, a vision so clear and powerful it left her gasping. Samuel, her Samuel, riding through the mountains with a small group of men, not hunting her, as she first feared, but searching for her. His face was haggard with worry and sleepless nights, his eyes red with tears he refused to shed. Behind him rode Thomas Welker and several others from Millfield. But their intentions were far from charitable. They mean to kill her, she heard Welker saying to Sheriff Morrison. Make it look like an accident. Indian attack, maybe, or a fall from her horse. Samuel will be free to remarry, the town's reputation will be intact, and everyone wins. Except for her, Morrison replied uncomfortably. She's not even fully human, Welker spat. Half-breed spawn doesn't deserve the same consideration as Christian folk. In her vision, Samuel turned in his saddle with such fury that his horse shied sideways. Say that again, he demanded, his voice deadly quiet. I dare you to say that again. Welker's hand moved toward his gun, but Morrison intervened. Easy boys, let's just find her and bring her back safe. That's what we came for. But Ayana could see the truth in their faces. Only Samuel wanted her alive. The others had already decided her fate. She woke from the vision with a cry, her heart pounding with terror, and something else, a fierce protective love for the man who was risking everything to find her. Fool though he might be, blind though he was to the danger surrounding him, he was coming for her. Love was bringing him into the mountains, even as hatred followed close behind. Chapter 6. The choice grandmother Willow found her at dawn, standing at the edge of the camp, and staring down the trail that led back toward the white man's world. You saw something in the sacred smoke, the old woman said. It wasn't a question. My husband, Ayana replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He's coming, but he's not alone, and the others, they mean him harm. Then you must choose, Grandmother Willow said simply. You can stay here, safe among your people, and let the white world work out its own problems. Or you can go back to that world, knowing it will never truly accept you. Ayana closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Here in the mountains, she had found everything she had been searching for without knowing it. Family, belonging, a sense of purpose and identity that no one could take from her. These people would protect her, teach her, love her unconditionally. She could live out her days in peace, free from the hatred and suspicion that had driven her from Millfield. But Samuel was riding toward danger, and she was the only one who could save him. There is a third choice, she said slowly, the plan forming in her mind even as she spoke. I could go back and face them, all of them. Show them that I'm not the frightened half-breed they drove from town. Show them what it means to be Salagi. Grandmother Willow smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. That is a dangerous path, granddaughter. The white world has no place for proud Cherokee women. Then maybe it's time to make one. Chief Dancing Bear approached them, his weathered face grave with concern. I have sent scouts down the mountain, he said. Your husband and his companions are 2 days' ride from here, maybe less. They are armed and moving fast. How many? Ayana asked. 7 men, including your husband. The others, he shook his head grimly. Their intentions are not good. We could stop them if you wish. The mountains have many hidden places, and we know every trail. No, Ayana said firmly. No more violence. I'll go to them, alone. Grandmother Willow looked alarmed. Not alone, Ayana replied, touching the eagle feathers in her hair. I carry the spirits of my ancestors with me. I carry the strength of the Salagi, and I carry something else, the love of a good man, who deserves better than to die for my sake. She turned to face the assembled band, her new family, who had given her so much in such a short time. I have to go back, she told them, not to their world, but to create a new world, one where love matters more than blood, where acceptance is stronger than prejudice. Chief Dancing Bear stepped forward and placed a strong hand on her shoulder. "You are truly your mother's daughter," he said with pride. "May the Great Spirit guide your steps and guard your heart." An hour later, Ayana Atsila rode out of the camp on a sturdy mountain pony, her new Cherokee identity proudly displayed in her clothing and bearing. She carried her rifle across her saddle and a war cry in her heart, ready to face whatever awaited her on the trail below. Behind her, the camp prepared for the possibility of violence. Her people, her true people, would not abandon her if things went wrong. The knowledge gave her strength as she descended into the valley where her fate waited. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. She found them at midday, just as her vision had shown her. 7 men picking their way carefully up a narrow mountain trail, their horses laboring in the thin air. Samuel rode at the front, his face etched with determination and worry. Behind him, Thomas Welker and Sheriff Morrison flanked 4 other men from Millfield, men she recognized, but had never considered enemies. She appeared on the trail ahead of them like a figure from legend, her Cherokee dress vivid against the stark mountain landscape. The eagle feathers in her hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and the traditional paint on her face marked her clearly as what she was, a daughter of the Salagi, proud and unashamed. The men pulled up short, their horses dancing nervously on the narrow trail. She could see the fear in their faces, the sudden realization that they were far from home and facing something they didn't understand. "Ayana," Samuel breathed, spurring his horse forward. But Welker grabbed his reins, stopping him. "Stay back," Welker hissed. "Look at her. She's gone full savage." "I am Ayana Atsila," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "Daughter of Mary Singing Bird, granddaughter of Chief Dancing Bear, forever fire of the Salagi people. I know why you have come." Samuel tried again to urge his horse forward, but Morrison this time blocked his path. "She's not your wife anymore, Samuel," the sheriff said quietly. "Look at her. That's not a white woman. That's a full-blooded Indian." "She's the woman I married," Samuel replied, his voice steel. "She's the woman I love." "Then you're a fool," Welker spat, drawing his rifle. "And we're all going to pay for your weakness." The other men followed suit, their weapons coming up with practiced ease. Ayana sat perfectly still on her pony, showing no fear despite the odds against her. She had faced worse than death in the past weeks. She had faced the loss of everything she thought she was. These men and their guns held no terror for her now. "You came to kill me," she said, not a question but a statement of fact. "You told my husband you came to bring me home, but your hearts hold only murder." "Damn right," Welker snarled. "Should have done it years ago before you could poison our town with your presence." Samuel's face went white with shock and rage. "You lying son of a—" He wheeled his horse toward Welker, but the older man swung his rifle toward him. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Samuel. You can mourn your squaw wife and then find yourself a proper Christian woman. Everyone wins." That was when the mountains came alive. Cherokee warriors seemed to materialize from the rocks and trees around them, 24 men in war paint and traditional dress, their weapons trained on the men from Millfield. They had moved so silently that not even the horses had sensed their approach. Chief Dancing Bear stepped into view on an outcropping above the trail, his voice carrying the authority of generations of leadership. "You are trespassing on Cherokee land," he announced. "You came here to commit murder. The penalty for such crimes is death." The men from Millfield looked around wildly, their rifles useless against enemies they couldn't see. Several of them were already crying out in terror, begging for mercy. But Ayana raised her hand, and the warriors held their fire. "No," she called out. "This is not the Cherokee way. We do not murder those who show fear." She urged her pony forward, moving past the frozen men until she reached Samuel. Their eyes met across the space between their horses, and she saw everything in his face: love, wonder, fear, and a dawning understanding of who she really was. "You came for me," she said softly. "I couldn't let you go," he replied, his voice breaking. "I couldn't let them drive you away, and you were willing to die for me, if necessary." She reached out and touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the lines of exhaustion and worry. "That's all I needed to know." Then she turned to face the others, her voice carrying across the mountain valley with the power of absolute conviction. "I am going back to Millfield," she announced, "not as the woman you drove out, but as who I truly am." I am Cherokee. I am proud of my heritage, and I will not hide from small-minded people who fear what they don't understand. The hell you will, Welker started to say, but Chief Dancing Bear's war cry cut him off. You will escort her safely home, the chief commanded, or you will not leave these mountains alive. The choice is yours. Chapter 8.
Yee.
The return. The ride back to Millfield took 3 days, but it felt like a lifetime. Samuel rode beside Ayanna, their conversation tentative at first, then growing stronger as they relearned each other. She told him about her time with the Cherokee, about discovering her heritage and claiming her true name. He listened without judgment, his love for her deepening with each revelation. I should have stood up to them from the beginning, he said on the second night, as they sat by their campfire. I should have told them all to go to hell. You did what you thought was best, she replied, leaning against his shoulder. You couldn't know what you didn't know. I know now, he said firmly, and I'll never let anyone speak against you again. The men from Millfield rode in sullen silence, their grand plans for murder reduced to shameful fear. The Cherokee warriors had vanished as silently as they had appeared, but everyone knew they were being watched. Any attempt at violence would bring swift and terrible retribution. On the morning of the third day, they crested the ridge overlooking Millfield. The town spread below them like a child's toy village, neat and orderly and utterly foreign to the woman who had once called it home. Are you sure about this? Samuel asked, seeing her hesitation. No, she admitted. But being sure was never the point. Being true to myself, that's the point. They rode into town at midday, when the streets were full of people going about their daily business. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Children pointed and stared. Women gathered in whispering clusters, their eyes wide with shock and something that might have been fear. Ayanna Atsila rode through their midst with her head held high, her Cherokee dress in war paint, proclaiming her identity to everyone who had eyes to see. She was no longer hiding, no longer ashamed, no longer willing to pretend to be something she was not. They stopped in front of the general store, Samuel's store, their store. A crowd had gathered, murmuring and pointing, but keeping their distance. These were the same people who had driven her out less than 2 weeks ago, and they weren't sure what to make of her return. Samuel dismounted and helped her down from her horse, his actions deliberate and public. He was making a statement, choosing his side for all to see. Friends and neighbors, he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the square. I'd like you to meet my wife, Ayanna Atsila, daughter of the Cherokee Nation. The murmur of the crowd grew louder, more agitated. She could see the same hatred in their faces, the same fear and revulsion that had driven her into the mountains. But she could also see something else, uncertainty. She was no longer the broken, ashamed woman they had cast out. She was something new, something they didn't know how to handle. Thomas Welker pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. This is an abomination, he shouted. We won't have savages living among us, corrupting our children. Then you're free to leave, Ayanna replied, calmly, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had learned from Chief Dancing Bear. This is my home too. I have as much right to be here as anyone. Right? Welker's face was purple with fury. You have no rights. You're not even human. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Ayanna felt the familiar fire rising in her chest. But this time, instead of shame, she felt only pity for the small, frightened man before her. I am Salagi, she said simply. I am the granddaughter of chiefs, the daughter of warriors, the keeper of stories that are older than your civilization. If that makes me less than human in your eyes, then perhaps you need to examine what humanity truly means. She turned to address the crowd, her voice growing stronger with each word. You drove me out because you feared what I represented, the mixing of worlds, the blending of blood, the possibility that your carefully ordered society might not be as pure as you pretended. But I am not your enemy. I never was. A woman in the crowd, Mrs. Patterson, whose daughter Ayanna had nursed through scarlet fever, stepped forward hesitantly. But you're Indian, she said, as if that explained everything. Yes, Ayanna agreed. I am Cherokee. I am also the woman who sat by your daughter's bedside for 3 days when she was dying. I am the woman who organized food drives for the winter poor, who taught your children to read, who helped deliver half the babies born in this town in the last 5 years. My blood hasn't changed. Only your knowledge of it has. She could see the conflict in their faces, the struggle between their prejudices and their memories of her kindness. These were not evil people, she realized. They were simply afraid, trapped by the limitations of their understanding. I know this is difficult, she continued, her voice gentler now. I know it challenges everything you thought you knew about the world. But I'm asking you to choose love over fear, acceptance over hatred. I'm asking you to judge me by my actions, not by the accident of my birth. Mayor Hutchins cleared his throat nervously. Mrs. Her Mrs. and Miss. Her Miss. He struggled with what to call her. Ayanna Atsila Blackwood, she said, claiming all her names with pride. Cherokee, by blood, American by birth, your neighbor by choice. The thing is, the mayor continued, the territorial government contract will stand, Samuel interrupted firmly. My wife and I are partners in this business, have been for 5 years. Her heritage doesn't change her abilities or her contributions to this community. But what will people think? Mrs. Henderson asked, voicing the fear that lurked in all their hearts. They'll think what they choose to think, Ayanna replied. But I won't hide anymore. I won't pretend to be something I'm not to make others comfortable. This is who I am, all of who I am, and I'm proud of every part of my heritage. The crowd was beginning to disperse, people drifting away in small groups, their conversations intense and conflicted. Change, Ayanna knew, would not come overnight, but it would come. She had planted a seed of possibility in their minds, and eventually, it would grow. Chapter 9. The New Beginning. In the weeks that followed, Millfield slowly adjusted to its transformed resident. Some people, like the Hendersons and Thomas Welker, never overcame their prejudices. They crossed the street, rather than walk past her, whispered behind her back, and made their displeasure known in a dozen small ways. But others surprised her. Dr. Matthews, the town physician, approached her one afternoon to ask about Cherokee herbal remedies. Mrs. Patterson brought her daughter to visit, and the little girl stared with fascination at Ayanna's traditional dresses, and listened with wide eyes to stories of Cherokee legends. The general store prospered as never before. Word spread throughout the territory of the remarkable Cherokee woman who could predict weather patterns, identify medicinal plants, and speak 3 languages fluently. Traders came from hundreds of miles away, drawn by curiosity, but staying because of her keen business sense and fair dealing. Samuel watched his wife's transformation with wonder and growing pride. The frightened, ashamed woman who had fled into the mountains had been replaced by someone magnificent, a bridge between worlds, a living testament to the possibility of understanding across cultural divides. I barely recognize you, he told her one evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. I'm the same woman you married, she replied, taking his hand. I just stopped hiding who I really was, and I love who you really are, he said, bringing her fingers to his lips. All of who you are. Their love had deepened and strengthened through the trials they had faced. The man who had married Mary Morrison, the respectable missionary's daughter, had learned to love Ayanna Atsila, the proud Cherokee woman. In doing so, he had become more himself, braver, more compassionate, more willing to stand up for what was right, regardless of the cost. The territorial government contract proved to be just the beginning. As word of their success spread, other opportunities followed. They became the primary suppliers for 3 military forts, 2 mining operations, and a growing network of settlements throughout the region. Ayanna's ability to communicate with various Native American tribes made her invaluable in negotiations and trade agreements. But perhaps the most significant change was in the children. Young people, she discovered, were far more accepting of differences than their parents. The children of Millfield began to gather around her when she worked in her garden, listening to Cherokee stories and learning traditional songs. She taught them to identify medicinal plants, to read the signs of changing weather, to understand that wisdom could come from many sources. You're changing them, Samuel observed one afternoon, watching a group of children practice words in Cherokee. They're changing themselves, she corrected. I'm just giving them permission to be curious instead of afraid. 1 year after her return to Millfield, the town faced a crisis that would test everything they had learned. A cholera outbreak struck the surrounding region, and the territorial authorities were preparing to quarantine the entire area. Trade would be cut off, supplies would dwindle, and people would likely die from starvation as well as disease. But Ayanna had been raised by people who understood survival, who had faced impossible odds and endured. She organized the town's response with the efficiency of a military commander and the wisdom of a Cherokee grandmother. Working with Dr. Matthews, she identified and prepared traditional remedies that proved surprisingly effective against the disease. She organized clean water distribution, established sanitation protocols, and coordinated with the Cherokee band in the mountains to ensure adequate food supplies. Most importantly, she convinced the territorial authorities to allow the Cherokee to serve as intermediaries with other tribes, facilitating trade and communication, while maintaining necessary health precautions. The crisis lasted 3 months, but Millfield not only survived, it thrived. When other communities were devastated by disease and economic collapse, Millfield remained healthy and prosperous. Word spread throughout the territory of the remarkable collaboration between white settlers and Cherokee allies. Thomas Welker, whose own family was saved by Cherokee medicine during the outbreak, found himself in the awkward position of owing his life to the woman he had tried to kill. He never fully overcame his prejudices, but he stopped actively opposing her presence in the community. Grudging acceptance, Samuel called it, not friendship, but not hatred either. It's enough, Ayanna replied. Progress comes one heart at a time. Chapter 10. The legacy. 5 years after her return from the mountains, Ayanna Atsila Blackwood stood before the largest gathering in Millfield's history. Representatives from the territorial government, military officials, tribal leaders from 6 different nations, and settlers from communities throughout the region had come to witness the signing of the Millfield Accords, a groundbreaking agreement that established new protocols for trade, conflict resolution, and mutual assistance between Native American tribes and white settlements. She wore a dress that perfectly symbolized her journey, traditional Cherokee deerskin decorated with porcupine quills and eagle feathers, but cut in a style that acknowledged her place in both worlds. Her hair was braided with ribbons in the colors of both the Cherokee Nation and the American flag. "Friends," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, "we gather today, not as enemies or strangers, but as neighbors who have learned to see past the surface differences to the common humanity beneath." The agreement they were celebrating had taken 3 years to negotiate, with Ayanna serving as the primary intermediary between all parties. It established trade protocols, dispute resolution mechanisms, and mutual defense agreements that would become a model for the entire western frontier. But more than the formal agreement, what impressed the gathered dignitaries was the visible evidence of successful integration in Millfield itself. Cherokee families had settled in the town, their children attending school alongside white children. Mixed marriages were becoming common and accepted. The general store employed people of various backgrounds, and the town council included both Cherokee and white representatives. "This is what America could become," Governor Wilson remarked to Samuel as they watched Ayanna address the crowd. "A place where different peoples find common ground instead of common enemies." "She's always believed that was possible," Samuel replied with pride, "even when nobody else did." The ceremony concluded with a traditional Cherokee blessing, followed by a Christian prayer, followed by songs in both languages. Children who had grown up in this new world moved easily between cultural traditions, equally comfortable with Cherokee legends and European fairy tales, with traditional dances and modern music. That evening, as the last of the visitors departed, Samuel and Ayanna walked hand in hand through the streets of their transformed town. The changes were visible everywhere. Cherokee crafts in store windows, bilingual signs on businesses, children playing games that mixed traditions from both cultures. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come back?" Samuel asked as they paused before the monument the town had erected in honor of the Millfield Accords. "Every choice creates its own world," she replied, quoting a Cherokee proverb. "I chose love over fear, truth over comfort, hope over despair. This world, our world, is the result." They continued their walk, passing the school where Cherokee and English were taught side by side, the clinic where traditional and modern medicine worked in partnership,
the community center where people of all backgrounds gathered for celebrations and ceremonies. "What's next?" Samuel asked, gesturing toward the mountains where more Cherokee families were considering joining the growing community. "More bridges," Ayanna said simply. "More understanding, more love winning over fear." As they reached their home, the same house she had fled from in desperation years before, she paused to look back at the town spreading below them. Lights flickered in windows where families of every background were settling in for the night, their children growing up in a world where difference was a source of strength rather than division. "You know what I've learned," she said, turning to face her husband in the golden glow of their porch light. "What's that?" "Love doesn't just transcend boundaries, it transforms them. It turns walls into bridges, strangers into family, fear into understanding. And it starts with one person willing to stand up and say, 'This is who I am, and I'm not afraid anymore.'" Samuel pulled her close, marveling once again at the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. The frightened woman who had fled into the mountains had returned as a force of nature, changing not just her own life but the lives of everyone around her. "I love you, Ayanna Tsila Blackwood," he whispered against her hair, "all of who you are." "And I love you, Samuel Blackwood," she replied, her voice full of the certainty that had carried her through every trial. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me become myself." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had guided her ancestors across continents and through countless generations of struggle and triumph. In the mountains, her Cherokee family slept peacefully, knowing their daughter had found her place in the world. And in the town below, children dreamed of a future where love truly could conquer all boundaries, a future that was already beginning to unfold. Epilogue, the Forever Fire. 20 years later, historians would mark the Millfield Accords as the beginning of a new era in American frontier history. The model of integration and cooperation pioneered in that small Colorado town would spread throughout the West, preventing countless conflicts and creating communities where diverse peoples thrived together. Ayanna Tsila Blackwood would live to see her great-grandchildren grow up in a world where her mixed heritage was a source of pride rather than shame, where the Cherokee language was preserved and celebrated alongside English, where the wisdom of indigenous peoples was valued and incorporated into the growing American identity. But perhaps her greatest legacy was simpler and more profound than any historical milestone. She had proven that love, real love, courageous love, love that refuses to compromise with hatred, truly can transcend all boundaries. It can bridge the gap between worlds, heal the wounds of history, and create new possibilities where none existed before. In the end, that was the message that echoed through generations, that every person has the choice to build walls or bridges, to sow fear or plant hope, to hide in shame or stand proud in their truth. And when we choose love, messy, complicated, inconvenient love, we change not just our own lives, but the world itself. The forever fire burns on, passed from heart to heart, generation to generation, a flame that no amount of hatred or fear can ever extinguish. And somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, the wind still carries the echo of ancient songs, reminding us that we are all more than the sum of our divisions. We are one people, sharing one earth, united by the love that transcends all boundaries. The end.
The crack of the rifle echoed through the valley like thunder, and Ayanna Blackwood knew her time had run out. Behind her, the angry voices of Millfield's townspeople grew louder, their torches cutting through the dawn mist like angry fireflies. She pressed her horse harder up the treacherous mountain trail, her heart hammering against her ribs as stones scattered beneath iron's hooves. One misstep would send them both tumbling into the abyss below, but staying meant certain death, or worse. The twist that would reshape everything she believed about herself lay waiting in the mountains ahead, hidden among the people she'd been taught to fear.
Hash.
Chapter 1. The Reckoning. 3 days earlier, Ayanna had been Mrs. Samuel Blackwood, the respected wife of Millfield's most successful merchant. Her husband's general store was the heart of their small Colorado town, and she had worked alongside him for 5 years, managing the books with a precision that impressed even the bank president. The townspeople nodded respectfully when she passed. Their children played hopscotch outside her white picket fence, and the ladies' auxiliary always sought her counsel on matters of charity and community improvement. But that was before they discovered the truth about her parentage. The revelation came during what should have been a celebration. Samuel had just secured a lucrative contract to supply the territorial government, and the whole town had gathered at Murphy's saloon to toast their good fortune. Ayanna had worn her finest blue silk dress, the one with pearl buttons that Samuel had ordered specially from Denver. She remembered feeling beautiful, accepted, genuinely happy for perhaps the first time since arriving in Millfield. Then Thomas Welker, the town's self-appointed moral guardian, had stood up with a letter in his weathered hands. His voice cut through the festivities like a blade through silk. "Friends," he announced, his pale eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction, "I've received some disturbing information about one of our own." He unfolded the yellowed paper with deliberate slowness. "This here's a letter from a man named Joseph Clearwater, up in Montana. Claims he knew a woman named Mary Singing Bird, a Cherokee woman who bore a half-breed child 23 years ago, before disappearing into the wilderness." The saloon fell silent, except for the crackle of the fire and the soft tick of the grandfather clock. Ayanna felt the blood drain from her face as every eye in the room turned toward her. Samuel's hand found hers under the table, squeezing tightly, but she could feel the tremor in his fingers. "The child," Welker continued, savoring each word like a fine whiskey, "was given to a missionary couple named Morrison. They raised her as their own until she was 18, when she left to marry a merchant named Samuel Blackwood." The silence that followed was deafening. Ayanna could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of dozens of stares pressing down on her like a physical force. She had always known she looked different. Her skin held too much sun, her hair was too dark and straight, her cheekbones too pronounced. The Morrisons had told her she was adopted, but claimed her parents were good Christian folk who had died in a wagon train accident. The lie had been kind, protective. Now it crumbled around her like dried leaves. "That's enough," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Whatever Mrs. Blackwood's heritage, she's been nothing but a blessing to this community." But the damage was done. She could see it in their faces, the shift from acceptance to suspicion, from neighborly warmth to cold calculation. Mrs. Henderson, who had shared recipes and gossip over tea just yesterday, now looked at her as if she were a dangerous animal that had somehow learned to wear human clothing. "Half-breed," someone whispered from the back of the room. The word spread like wildfire, carried on hushed breaths and sideways glances. "Savage blood. No wonder she always seemed different. What else has she been hiding?" Samuel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "We're leaving," he announced, offering Ayanna his arm with deliberate courtesy. "Good evening, neighbors." They walked home in silence through streets that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Curtains twitched as they passed, and she caught glimpses of faces in windows, faces that had smiled at her just hours before, now twisted with suspicion and disgust. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. The next morning brought a delegation to their door. Mayor Hutchins led the group, his usually jovial face grave with embarrassment and determination. Behind him stood Thomas Welker, Sheriff Morrison, no relation to her adoptive parents, and half a dozen other prominent citizens. "Samuel," the mayor began, removing his hat and turning it nervously in his hands, "we need to talk." They gathered in the parlor, these men who had been guests at her table, who had praised her cooking and complimented her needlework. Now they perched on the edges of her furniture like crows on a fence post, unwilling to settle, eager to deliver their harsh message and depart. "It's nothing personal, you understand," Mayor Hutchins said, not meeting her eyes. "But the territorial government contract, well, they're particular about who they do business with. Word gets around about irregularities, and it could hurt the whole town." "Irregularities?" Samuel's voice was dangerously quiet. "You mean my wife's ancestry?" "Now Samuel," Welker interjected, leaning forward with false reasonableness, "you have to understand how this looks. We're a Christian community, a civilized community. We can't have her kind representing us in business dealings." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Ayanna felt something fundamental break inside her, not her heart, which had been breaking slowly for days, but something deeper. Her sense of belonging, her carefully constructed identity as a respectable frontier wife. her belief that love and good deeds could overcome the circumstances of birth. "What exactly are you proposing?" Samuel asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, if Mrs. Blackwood were to relocate, things could go back to normal. The contract would be safe, the town's reputation intact. And if she doesn't..." The silence that followed was answer enough. Ayanna saw the truth in their faces, the barely concealed hatred, the fear of contamination, the desperate need to expel the foreign element that threatened their carefully ordered world. "How long?" she asked quietly, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. Ayanna, Samuel began, but she held up her hand. "How long do I have?" 3 days, Welker said with visible satisfaction. "Enough time to make arrangements." After they left, Samuel held her while she cried, not the gentle tears of sorrow, but the raw, painful sobs of someone discovering that the world was far crueler than she had ever imagined. He whispered promises and reassurances, spoke of leaving together, of starting over somewhere else, but she could hear the uncertainty in his voice, could feel the way he held her just a little too carefully, as if she might suddenly transform into something wild and dangerous. That night, she lay awake listening to him breathe, memorizing the sound. She had seen the doubt creeping into his eyes, the way he looked at her now, searching for signs of savagery, wondering what other secrets she might be hiding. The man who had married Marison, the refined daughter of missionaries, was struggling to reconcile that woman with Ayanna Singing Bird, the half-Cherokee outcast. On the second night, she found him in his study, staring at a map of California. "We could go west," he said without looking up. "Start fresh where nobody knows us." "You mean where nobody knows me," she corrected gently. He finally met her eyes, and she saw the truth there, the love that remained, yes, but also the fear, the uncertainty, the slow poison of other people's hatred seeping into his heart. "I won't ask you to give up everything for me, Samuel," she said, her voice steady, despite the tears on her cheeks. "You've built a good life here. These are your people, your community. You're my wife," he said, but the words sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. She kissed his forehead gently, tasting salt. "I know you love me. That's enough. That's more than enough." Chapter 2. The Unraveling. The next morning brought a delegation to their door. Mayor Hutchins led the group, his usually jovial face grave with embarrassment and determination. Behind him stood Thomas Welker, Sheriff Morrison, no relation to her adoptive parents, and half a dozen other prominent citizens. "Samuel," the mayor began, removing his hat and turning it nervously in his hands, "we need to talk." They gathered in the parlor, these men who had been guests at her table, who had praised her cooking and complimented her needlework. Now they perched on the edges of her furniture like crows on a fence post, unwilling to settle, eager to deliver their harsh message and depart. "It's nothing personal, you understand," Mayor Hutchins said, not meeting her eyes. "But the territorial government contract, well, they're particular about who they do business with. Word gets around about irregularities, and it could hurt the whole town." "Irregularities?" Samuel's voice was dangerously quiet. "You mean my wife's ancestry?" "Now Samuel," Welker interjected, leaning forward with false reasonableness, "you have to understand how this looks. We're a Christian community, a civilized community. We can't have her kind representing us in business dealings." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Ayanna felt something fundamental break inside her, not her heart, which had been breaking slowly for days, but something deeper. Her sense of belonging, her carefully constructed identity as a respectable frontier wife, her belief that love and good deeds could overcome the circumstances of birth. "What exactly are you proposing?" Samuel asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, if Mrs. Blackwood were to relocate, things could go back to normal. The contract would be safe, the town's reputation intact. And if she doesn't..." The silence that followed was answer enough. Ayanna saw the truth in their faces, the barely concealed hatred, the fear of contamination, the desperate need to expel the foreign element that threatened their carefully ordered world. "How long?" she asked quietly, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. "Ayanna," Samuel began, but she held up her hand. "How long do I have?" 3 days, Welker said with visible satisfaction. enough time to make arrangements. After they left, Samuel held her while she cried, not the gentle tears of sorrow, but the raw, painful sobs of someone discovering that the world was far crueler than she had ever imagined. He whispered promises and reassurances, spoke of leaving together, of starting over somewhere else, but she could hear the uncertainty in his voice, could feel the way he held her just a little too carefully, as if she might suddenly transform into something wild and dangerous. That night, she lay awake listening to him breathe, memorizing the sound. She had seen the doubt creeping into his eyes, the way he looked at her now, searching for signs of savagery, wondering what other secrets she might be hiding. The man who had married Mary Marison, the refined daughter of missionaries, was struggling to reconcile that woman with Ayanna Singing Bird, the half-Cherokee outcast. On the second night, she found him in his study, staring at a map of California. "We could go west," he said without looking up. "Start fresh where nobody knows us." "You mean where nobody knows me," she corrected gently. He finally met her eyes, and she saw the truth there, the love that remained, yes, but also the fear, the uncertainty, the slow poison of other people's hatred seeping into his heart. "I won't ask you to give up everything for me, Samuel," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "You've built a good life here. These are your people, your community. You're my wife," he said, but the words sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. She kissed his forehead gently, tasting salt. "I know you love me. That's enough. That's more than enough." Chapter 3. The Flight. On the morning of the third day, Ayanna Blackwood ceased to exist. The woman who saddled Iron in the pre-dawn darkness was someone else entirely, someone whose name she didn't yet know, whose story was still being written. She left behind the blue silk dress, the pearl buttons, the carefully maintained fiction of respectability. Instead, she wore her oldest riding clothes and packed only essentials: dried meat, hardtack, a water skin, her Samuel's father's hunting rifle, and the small leather pouch that held her few precious belongings. Samuel stood in the doorway of the stable, fully dressed despite the early hour. His eyes were red-rimmed with sleeplessness, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled with grief. "Don't," he whispered when she approached. "Please, we can figure this out." "We can." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring 5 years of love and loss into that single moment of connection. When she pulled away, his face was wet with tears. His or hers, she couldn't tell. "Take care of yourself, Samuel Blackwood," she whispered. "Be happy. Find someone who can give you the life you deserve." Ayanna, but she was already mounted, already turning Iron toward the mountains that rose like ancient guardians against the morning sky. She didn't look back, though she heard him call her name once, twice, then silence. The ride through town was a gauntlet of hostile stares and whispered curses. Children, coached by their parents, threw stones that clattered against the buildings around her. Mrs. Henderson stood in her doorway with her arms crossed, her face a mask of righteous satisfaction. Even the dogs seemed to sense the town's mood, barking and snarling as she passed. At the edge of Millfield, Thomas Welker waited with a small group of men. Their rifles weren't raised, but the threat was implicit. "You're making the right choice," he called out as she approached. "For everyone's sake." She didn't respond, didn't slow, didn't acknowledge his existence. Iron's hooves struck the hard-packed earth with a rhythm like a funeral drum as they left the town behind. The first day's ride took her deep into the foothills, following old hunting trails that wound between towering pines and aspen groves. The air grew thinner and colder as she climbed, and by evening she was grateful for the heavy coat she'd packed. She made camp beside a mountain stream, the water so clear and cold it made her teeth ache. That night, sitting beside her small fire, she tried to imagine what lay ahead. The Cherokee Nation was far to the east, in the Indian Territory, hundreds of miles across hostile country. She had no contacts there, no family she knew of, nothing but a name, Mary Singing Bird, and the faint hope that someone might remember her mother. On the second day, the trail became treacherous. Iron picked his way carefully across loose scree and around massive granite boulders, while Ayanna fought off waves of dizziness from the altitude. Her head pounded, and her chest felt tight with each breath. She had underestimated the challenges of mountain travel, the way the thin air would sap her strength and cloud her judgment. The storm hit on the third day. She saw it coming, a wall of dark clouds rolling over the peaks like a massive gray avalanche. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes, and the first fat snowflakes began to fall just as she crested a narrow ridge. Within an hour, the gentle snowfall had become a howling blizzard that turned the world white and featureless. Iron stumbled in the deepening snow, his breathing labored. Ayanna could barely see her hands in front of her face, let alone the trail ahead. They were lost, she realized with growing panic, lost in a blizzard at 10,000 feet, with night approaching and no shelter in sight. She pressed on because stopping meant dying, urging Iron forward through drifts that reached his belly. Her hands and feet had gone numb hours ago, and she could no longer feel Iron's reins in her frozen fingers. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow into her eyes and mouth until she could barely breathe. When Iron finally collapsed, she at first thought he had stumbled, but he didn't get up. His legs folded beneath him, and he rolled onto his side with a sound that was almost human, a sigh of exhaustion and defeat. Foam flecked his muzzle, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. "No," she whispered, falling to her knees beside him. "No, please, not now." But even as she spoke, she knew it was over. Iron had given everything he had to get her this far, and his great heart was finally failing. She cradled his massive head in her lap, her tears freezing on her cheeks as she watched the light fade from his dark eyes. "Thank you," she whispered into his ear. "Thank you for everything." When he was gone, she sat in the swirling snow beside his body and tried to decide how to die. She could stay here, let the cold take her gently into sleep, or she could keep walking, though she had no idea which direction led to safety. Either way, she was certain she would not see another sunrise. The wind was dying down, she realized dimly. The snow had softened to gentle flakes that drifted down like feathers from a torn pillow. Through the clearing air, she could see the faint outline of trees ahead, a small grove of pines that might offer some shelter from the worst of the storm. She struggled to her feet, her legs shaking with exhaustion and cold. One foot in front of the other, she told herself. Just keep moving, just a little farther. The grove was larger than she had thought, and as she stumbled between the massive trunks, she caught a glimpse of something that made her heart leap. Smoke, a thin column of gray rising straight up in the still air. Fire meant people. People meant the possibility of survival. She followed the smoke like a beacon, crashing through low branches and underbrush, with the last of her strength. The trees opened into a small clearing, and there, impossible and beautiful, stood a camp. 3 hide-covered structures, tipis, she realized, arranged around a central fire pit. Smoke rose from 2 of them, and she could see the warm glow of firelight through their translucent walls. Horses stood in a makeshift corral at the far end of the clearing, their thick winter coats dusted with snow. She took a step toward the nearest tipi, then another. Her vision was starting to blur, and she could feel consciousness slipping away like water through her fingers. She managed one more step before her legs gave out entirely. The last thing she remembered was falling forward into the snow, and the sound of voices, urgent, concerned, speaking in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. Chapter 4. The awakening warmth was the first thing that returned to her, blessed, wonderful warmth that seemed to flow through her body like honey. Then came the scents, wood smoke, sage, something earthy and medicinal that she couldn't identify. She was lying on something soft, furs, she realized, piled thick and warm beneath her aching body. Ayanna opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the golden light of a fire. She was inside one of the tipis, the walls decorated with intricate beadwork and painted symbols that seemed to dance in the flickering firelight. An elderly woman sat beside the fire, stirring something in a clay pot. Her long gray hair was braided with colorful ribbons, and her weathered face bore the kind of deep serenity that came from a lifetime of wisdom. The woman looked up as Ayanna stirred, and their eyes met across the small space. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the woman smiled, a warm, knowing expression that seemed to reach directly into Ayanna's heart. "You are awake, daughter," she said in accented English, her voice like wind through autumn leaves. "We were beginning to worry." "Where?" Ayanna's voice cracked like dry paper. The woman immediately brought her a gourd filled with warm, sweet tea. "You are safe," she said simply. "You are with the Silagi, your mother's people." The words hit Ayanna like a physical blow. She struggled to sit up, her mind reeling with questions and implications. "My mother's people," she whispered. The old woman nodded, settling back beside the fire. "I am Grandmother Willow," she said. "I knew your mother, Mary Singing Bird. She was my sister's daughter, which makes you my great-niece, though you have grown into a woman I do not recognize." Ayanna stared at her, trying to process this impossible revelation. "You knew my mother? I helped bring you into this world," Grandmother Willow said with quiet pride. "Right here in this very place. Your mother labored through a long winter night, and when you finally arrived with the dawn, you cried with such strength that the ravens answered from the treetops." Tears began to flow down Ayanna's cheeks, tears of grief, of wonder, of a joy so profound it felt like pain. "What happened to her? Why did she give me away?" Grandmother Willow's expression grew sad. She was young, and in love with a white man who promised her marriage and a life in his world. When she found herself with child, he abandoned her. She returned to us, but the shame was too great. After you were born, she left you with the missionaries and walked into the mountains. We never saw her again. The old woman reached out and touched Ayanna's face with gentle fingers. "But you carry her spirit, child. I see it in your eyes, in the way you move. The blood of our people runs strong in you." Over the next several days, as Ayanna recovered her strength, she learned about the small band of Cherokee who had made their home in these remote mountains. They were refugees, in a sense survivors of the Trail of Tears, who had refused to be driven to the Indian Territory. Led by Grandmother Willow's brother, Chief Dancing Bear, they had found sanctuary in this hidden valley, living as their ancestors had for generations. There were perhaps 30 of them in total, men, women, and children, who had chosen freedom over safety, tradition over assimilation. They hunted the mountain game, gathered wild plants, and lived in harmony with the harsh but beautiful landscape that had become their world. "We are the last of the free Cherokee," Chief Dancing Bear told her on her third day in the camp. He was a man of perhaps 60 winters, his face marked by the deep lines of someone who had seen much suffering, but had not let it break his spirit. "The government believes we are extinct, which suits us well enough." Ayanna found herself welcomed with a warmth she had never experienced before. These people, who had every reason to distrust outsiders, treated her like family, not because of what she had accomplished or what she could offer them, but simply because she belonged. She was Tsalagi, and that was enough. They taught her the old ways, how to read the signs in the sky and the behavior of animals, how to find edible plants even in winter, how to move through the forest without leaving a trace. They shared their stories, passed down through generations of oral tradition, tales of heroes and tricksters, of love and loss, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. But most importantly, they gave her a name. Chapter 5. The naming the ceremony took place on her 7th night in the village, during the full moon. The entire band gathered around a great fire built in the center of the clearing, their faces painted with traditional symbols, and their voices raised in ancient songs that seemed to call the spirits down from the star-filled sky. Ayanna knelt before Chief Dancing Bear, wearing a dress of soft deerskin decorated with porcupine quills and glass beads. Grandmother Willow had spent hours braiding eagle feathers into her hair, each one representing a prayer for strength, wisdom, and protection. "You have lived among the Wazaku, the white people, for many years," the chief said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp mountain air. "You have worn their names and followed their ways, but tonight, you return to your true self. Tonight, you claim your birthright as a daughter of the Tsalagi." He placed his hands on her shoulders, and she could feel the warmth of his touch through the thin deerskin. "Your mother was Mary Singing Bird, named for her voice that could call the morning into being. You are her daughter, but you are also your own woman, with your own path to walk. From this night forward, you shall be known as Ayanna Atsila, forever fire, for you carry within you a flame that cannot be extinguished by wind or rain or the cruelty of men."